One of India's most important judges tasked with delivering verdicts on the key issues of our time retired earlier this week. In a moment from now, we'll be talking to Justice Sanjay Kaul of the Supreme Court. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo story. The Chief Justice of India quoted fairs as he bid farewell to Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul, who has just retired from the Supreme Court bench. Justice Kaul has been literally in the hot seat. Parts of benches that delivered verdicts on Article 370 in Kashmir, same sex marriage, right to privacy, and earlier in his avatar at the High Court's very, very critical judgments on freedom of speech and expression when it came to M.F. Hussain and Perumal Murugan. There's a lot to talk to him about at a time when questions are being raised, not just about what the role ideally should be of the judiciary, but also about the collegium system that appoints judges, whether there are inordinate and sometimes it's been suggested deliberate delays at the pace at which sensitive cases are heard, why bail is becoming increasingly the exception rather than the norm, and what the role is of the Supreme Court as a pillar to safeguard democracy. Justice Kaul recently said that it is not the job of the court to play opposition to the government of the day. What exactly then is the ideal role of a Supreme Court judge? Let's go across now to our newsmaker. We're very pleased to have with us Justice Kaul. It's rare for ordinary people to get a chance to understand how men and women tasked with taking critical decisions of our time actually think. So, Justice Kaul, thank you so much for your time. Uh, let me actually start by asking you what has been the first couple of days like, not having had to be on the bench tasked with critical decision making. Is it weird? Are you feeling withdrawal symptoms? What have you been doing?
I am personally looking forward to what has to come. Barkha, I appreciate I've been 40 years in the legal profession, 22 years and a half as a judge. And there's a time in life when you feel you must get on with it. So be it with me. It's too early to say of a withdrawal system, but I'm not concerned about it. I think for some time I've been feeling that I've spent enough time and would like to do things for which I have not had time to do.
Do you retire hopeful or do you retire cynical? I ask you this because you've seen so much ferocious commentary on verdicts, how judges think, are judges independent enough, is there political pressure on judges? As you step out into the sort of no into the civilian world, if I can call it that, do you feel hopeful today or do you feel cynical?
No, I'm a hopeful person always. I feel there is a way forward. Yes, there are difficulties which arise. We all face them. But ultimately, there is a system working. If the system was not working, why are thousands and lakhs of people coming to it to seek justice? That's also a matter of faith. And this is despite our problems, I accept, of delays in the justice system, of not the perfect mechanism. But still, as a last resort, the common man, the common litigant, feels that if nothing works, he has to get to the court.
Let's get straight to one of the most important judgments that you were part of delivering, and that is 370. Now, of course, you're Kashmiri yourself. You come from Kashmir. You belong to the Pandit community that was very tragically and violently forced out of the valley. But more on that later. On the judgment itself, you were part of the bench that upheld the abrogation. Your slight difference in your own judgment was that you believed that Jammu and Kashmir did enjoy a degree of sovereignty even after independence. My question to you is: you would have seen the criticism from some quarters. Fali Nariman, I interviewed him. He made a technical argument. He said that a presidential notification in the way that it was issued cannot be the vehicle for change. There are others who believe that this has been a blow to federalism. I'm sure these are people you respect, people who are your friends, have been your peers. Were you disconcerted to see some of the criticism? On reflection, do you stand by what you said, what you argued on 370? You weren't alone, of course, but how did you see that criticism?
So, well, any issue generates debate. I'm a person who believes in a debate, and there are bound to be difference of perceptions. So, Fali is somebody I hold in great respect, I must say, one of the finest lawyers. But then we can have difference of perspectives. I listened to what he said and your interview with him. And ultimately, what he said was the process was not right. This is his view. But he was also categorical on the aspect that this is the law of the land as it stands now. I have no regret over what I wrote. I believe that is the correct view. Some may agree, some may not agree with it. The assimilation of Kashmir followed a slightly different pattern into the country. And as it went along, the degree of assimilation increased. Now, whether there should have been a total assimilation as was being sought was a political decision. That political decision was taken. The remaining, which was resting, was the constitutional judgment on that issue as to whether such assimilation could take place, and the process was fine. Unanimously, the court on most other issues have ruled in its favor. Yes, you're right. The slight difference of view I had was that I thought that a part of sovereignty remained, but it assimilated through over a period of time. And secondly, I wrote my own epilogue because I'm concerned with the people of Kashmir from one community or the other is not important. It's how that area, I believe, has suffered.
I'm going to get to that epilogue in just a moment, but I'm glad to hear you watched my interview with Mr. Nariman. Like I said, he made a technical point. He said, look, I accept the Supreme Court verdict. I'm no one to question it. This is now the law of the land. He just thought that the way it was done was unconstitutional, the way the notification, the way the abrogation was sought to be done. And he made the point that even if the government of the day had the numbers to do so, so therefore eventually the outcome would have been the same, on a point of law he disagreed. When you saw that, did it give you pause, or do you just think that your interpretation of the law is different?
No, I listened to it. I appreciate here the point of view, but I believe the call we took in the circumstances was the right call to take.
Let's come to your epilogue then, since you do, of course, stand by your judgment. But you said in the circumstances, it was the right call to take. What do you mean by in the circumstances?
In the circumstances, in the scenario where there was absence of state government at that time, there was a constitutional mechanism failure earlier which had occurred, which had brought a governor's rule. So we will have to judge the methodology in the scenario in which it existed. It was not a perfect scenario. So whether in that scenario, how the implementation had to take place constitutionally, we believe that the way taken by the government cannot be really faulted.
In your own judgment, in your epilogue, there was a very impassioned acknowledgement of what you call the intergenerational trauma of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And I think in a way, you don't have to be Kashmiri to recognize that, but I'm sure your own personal experience in some way informed that understanding. I don't think we've had the opportunity to hear about that experience. Could you speak a little bit to how your own experience as a Kashmiri Pandit underscored your understanding of the trauma there?
So let's see, let's go back a little. 1947 saw a partition of the country. There was a huge displacement. People suffered. People moved from here to there. But those people then rebuilt their lives. So that was a trauma over which it took almost a generation for the next generation to accept the existence and proceed with their lives. Similarly, in Kashmir, my own belief is from 1980s, the problems were cropping up, uh, possibly not addressed or not addressed rightly, till it blew up. When it blew up, the consequences was directly faced by the Kashmiri Pandit community, which had to migrate. 4.5 lakhs plus people had to leave their home and hearth in a comfort which they were used to. And I believe politically it was never tackled. It was never thought what should be the right way forward. Now, after that, the army came in because it became an issue of the border protection and other aspects. Army is not a force which is it's meant to fight wars. It's not his own ways of looking after it, and we were facing a war. So in that, the people who left behind, also faced a problem, and there were perceived excesses which happened. So both communities faced this problem, and a whole generation has grown from 1989, 88, 89 till today. We are talking in terms of 33, 34 years. So a person who was, say, 5 years old is about 40 years old today, has not seen anything better. It's only the last couple of years, I keep going there, that I feel there's a better understanding, the feeling that this common culture had its own path. The younger people may not have seen it. They missed something which should have been there. And thus a way has to be found. But I believe the way forward would require an acceptance of what has happened, and the acceptance it is not the right thing which has happened. If you do that, you provide a solace to the next generation who feels there's a recognition of what has happened to the previous generation and then carries forward. I also believe that when we talk about the way forward is not creating ghettos for the community. The way forward is to give the community confidence to live in the environment and the place they lived. Nobody's going to come back suddenly after 30 years, the next generation. People have settled in different parts of the world in the country. But like all people who move, you want to keep your roots alive. And that
Yeah.
roots must remain alive with the place you belong to. That's the only way I think will happen. For one, have kept my touch with them. I talk to people. I sometimes try to understand what is the view from both sides. And I keep telling them that unless you forget the past and move forward, um, it'll be difficult to accept the reality.
You have urged for the setting up of a sort of Africa style, South Africa style Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You also acknowledge in your epilogue the fact that violations have taken place by both state and non state actors. Do you believe that anyone will heed this suggestion by you? Because you also speak about how memory can fade. Before memory fades, let this happen in a time bound manner. Uh, how strongly do you feel about the need for this Truth and Reconciliation Commission?
Uh, uh, if I've written about it, I obviously mean it. Whether the government accepts it or not is not something within my domain.
Would
But
you
I
hope?
believe if
Would you hope that the government, so quick to embrace the Supreme Court verdict, would also embrace this recommendation?
I hope so, because I think that will help in assimilation. After all, they also say that assimilation should be there. The objective of all this is better assimilation of the state in the country. If that is the aim and if that is the objective, then what has been what I perceive as an injustice to different sections of society must also gain recognition so that people learn to live with peace. Everything can't be only a law and order situation.
Absolutely. Personally, do you think of a time when your family might be able to go back to the Kashmir Valley in a more permanent way? Would you like to?
Uh, yeah, I keep going back. I have my family house which has survived. Some of the places, cottages I had did not survive, were destroyed. I've tried to rebuild. I want my family to have roots in Kashmir. I think we'll lose our roots, and my
Yeah.
children and my have backed me in this issue that they would like to have their roots there, and that's why I keep going back and I'm getting my place in order so that I stayed in after almost 34 years. In June, I went and stayed 2 weeks in my own house there. So it was a very, very touching moment for me to be able to come to my own place and stay there and not stay in a guest house.
That's lovely and very powerful, I imagine, and also emotionally gut wrenching, I imagine. I have one last question on Kashmir. The Supreme Court was criticized, as much as one can criticize your lordships without facing contempt, for the delay in hearing this very important case. It was 4 years after the fact almost. Why do you think that delay happened?
So before I answer this question, just to give you the one thing which I did not only stay in my house. I
Yeah.
saw walking paths in front of the house. It's near the Jhelum. I saw people, tourists, local people walking there, talking, wanting to say, okay, you are coming and stay here, come back and, there. I invited people who were my neighbors whom I did not know any better. I knew their families. And my children would take out their dogs for a walk, or children at even 11 o'clock at night. Can you do it in Delhi? You can't do it. That's the environment I knew of that place. And I was very happy to
You're
see
saying
that
Kashmir,
environment.
you're saying Kashmir feels safer today than Delhi?
Yes, yes, in some ways, yes. We look at incidents. So when an
Yeah.
incident happens in Kashmir, we say, oh, this has happened in Kashmir. But there are certain districts which are prone to a problem. It's not that every part of Kashmir is touched by it. So
Yeah.
don't these incidents happen all over the world in the best of developed societies, somebody going crazy?
I mean, there is
To
a
live
different
with such
challenge. You
sentiments.
don't need me to tell you this. There's a different challenge of security in Kashmir. It's not the same.
Yes, it is. It is. I'm not denying there is a security challenge. We'll have to work it out. There's no want to do that.
Yeah.
Um, but I believe things are changing. I believe the people are starting to think. There may be difference of perceptions, but they do feel that assimilation is a way forward, and that is also actually egged me on to write the epilogue. On the delay, see, when we began the hearing earlier, I was part of that bench.
Yeah.
In the middle of the hearing, when largely the petitioners had addressed, suddenly this issue cropped up or was raised, whether it should be a 5 judges or 7 judges bench. A lot of councils were not concerned, wanted the hearing to go on. But there were some councils who were quite adamant at this issue being addressed. And that issue thus became like a primary issue to be addressed. It took a little time to address that issue. And thereafter, of course, for some time, the hearing has got jettisoned. Um, in our own ways, we thought it should be taken up. Well, I can't really say why it was not taken up, but all matters have possibly a time when they must come up and be heard, and it was heard that way.
Let's move on to another sort of critical and recent verdict, the same sex marriage case. Now, this is very, very interesting because it first, I think, came before you as an issue when you were at the Delhi High Court. However, you and the Chief Justice, notwithstanding your recognition that same sex couples have the right to a civil union, including the right to adopt a child, were outvoted on that matter by three other judges. All five of you argued that there is no fundamental right to marriage within the Constitution, and therefore the Special Marriage Act cannot be read in such a way that it now applies to same sex marriages. In other words, i.e., this is now the Parliament's ambit. Do you feel disappointed? It seemed to a lot of millions of Indians that the Supreme Court would have gone further than all of you did with respect.
So let's see how it began. 2001, it came up before me. It's been a long journey for this section of society. Social norms at times take longer to change. The acceptance takes longer to change. Sometimes law increases the pace, as has happened, say, in laws relating to women, as it is said in relating to succession and other aspects under the Hindu law. Sometimes the society makes the law to change. So the journey which initially that matter went through was up and down to the Supreme Court, till in different nuances it finally came to where it was. And really speaking, in the privacy judgment, where 4 judges authored, Justice Chanchud authored it, and I was supporting a judgment. 5 judges had already talked about this right to privacy in this behalf. So, in a way, the issue was technically may not be over, but was over with the privacy judgment. And then the final judgment came. This was the next stage of social evolution, of recognizing a marriage. Now, no law recognized that marriage. What to do? There are issues which this section of society takes. Legislation is certainly a way forward. But when legislations don't exist, what is the interim period to be done? I felt, and the chief felt, that recognizing a civil union, giving similarity of rights, would subserve the purpose to a large extent, and then the way forward would be ultimate legislation. 3 judges did not agree with it. Well, minority judgments are always said to be a call to the future. Many cases where minority judgments have later found favor as the majority judgments have occurred. So I believe this is a social churning process. Maybe it was felt in some sectors that the country was not ready for it. Maybe the parliament has not enacted it. I'm hopeful that in years to come, this view would find favor.
In a way, already, if you look back at the fact that the Supreme Court once upon a time spoke of the LGBTQAI community being a minority, I think it was Justice Singhvi's judgment. Today we have this judgment, and you're saying this minority view by you and Chief Justice Chandrachud. You believe sooner or later a time will come when a future bench will rule differently.
I think so. I think it will be affected by a social change which is already taking place. The thinking of the younger generation is different from the thinking of the older generation on this aspect. I'm sure you would realize this when you talk to the younger set of people. When I talk to the younger set of people, my children's perception would be very different on how this issue has to be dealt with.
Were your children disappointed at the dining table that dad didn't go far enough?
Maybe.
Well,
But
at
that's a
least
generational issue.
absolutely. No, I think there's a lot of important observations by you and the Chief Justice in particular. Also, in recognizing your own comment was that non-heterosexual relationships are integral part of Indian culture. Now, this in particular, I think was a very important comment because often there's a kind of puritanical or orthodox religious argument against this. So I just want you to talk about this part of your own judgment.
So this emanates from my experience in the judiciary that often we said that X or Y doesn't belong to this country. It's a Western notion. But if you look to the history of this country and the area we are proud of, undisputedly proud of, is the first 1200 years. We've had the Mughal rule, the British rule. I believe what is Victorian philosophy is often passed off as that this was the history of the country, while our thought process is very different. Uh, look at uh, uh, Look at our statues, look at our temples, look at what is around. Is it not a reflection of what the country stood for, what the culture of the country stood for? I think it's one of the most liberal processes which existed in our country. And slowly, a moment when you talk about recognizing our culture, recognizing our thought processes, bringing them into the fore, this will come into the fore that we were an extremely liberal society, and that's what we should move towards.
Yeah, I think those are very important points. And as you said, I hope they pave the way for more concrete, even more concrete change. At your at your farewell, as you left the Supreme Court, you urged judges to be bold. You said, if those of us without with so much constitutional protection aren't bold, then who else will be? Do you believe the judges of the Supreme Court and the High Courts of India have been bold?
Well, they have been bold. There cannot be a uniform pattern to it. If you look at, uh, I also mentioned in this in the context that we criticize the executive often that they are not taking decisions. But the executive sometimes fears that they may not be hauled up for something a couple of years down their demitting office. Judiciary has this protection where you have a constitutional protection, and therefore I think we should not hesitate in going by what we believe is correct. I have had reservations and I've written on the bail issues, how it has to be tackled, why the Supreme Court is inundated with bail orders being challenged, where one third of such cases almost are being interfered by us, though it's not our task really. So, somewhere, when I used to lecture the judicial academies or the subordinate judges, I used to tell them, look, if grant of a bail, which is for consideration or improper, is not correct, then non-grant of bail for the correct reasons is also something which is dishonesty in the integrity sense. It is in the intellectual sense you do so. So we can't keep people in substitution of conviction behind bars as under trials for long, which is a large number of cases. So we have to do it, and high courts are constitutional courts. So I keep talking when I talk in privately to them that these cases should not come up before us because these should be capable of being tackled at the high court level. I think some discussion must go on this process so that the highest court is not inundated with bail matters. I mean, each bench takes every day bail matters to deal with the volume numbers. This is not the Supreme Court's job, strictly speaking, but we can't let go because the freedom of an individual is a very important part of our constitutional scheme. So, if we really feel perturbed, and obviously the court as an institution by the percentage of his interference has shown that there is something to be desired.
But talking about boldness, there are questions over or around whether judges have been bold enough in asserting their right to appoint judges. Now, much has been said about the Collegium, and I think you have gone on record to say that the NGAC could have been tweaked, but that didn't happen. It's now become a kind of government versus judiciary clash. But there are instances, let's take a Saurabh Kirpal, for instance, where there is a recommendation and then the government just doesn't move the file. So inaction or silence is also a kind of veto. Do you believe that the Supreme Court Collegium, and you've been a part of it in the past, has asserted itself to the extent that it should have vis-a-vis the government?
So, if you see the history of appointment process, right from 1950s to 1990, a particular pattern of appointment process took place where the Chief Justice and the government used to hold discussion. It's not unusual at that time. I'm aware of good lawyers who would get tagged with some political inclination and not be appointed even during those times. Then you had the collegium system come in because it was felt that there was a time for a change. Of course, I'm conscious of the fact that those were time periods of coalition governments, so not so strong governments, I would say, and that process worked well. Um the ultimately the political people wanted to have a larger role to play, so the parliament passed a law unanimously. It did not muster the test so far as the Supreme Court is concerned. That is the law for the time being. Therefore, I is must be operated the way it is because that's the law of the land. Now, in the whole process, the appointments suffer. It is undoubtedly so. The process is slow. My concern is how do you persuade young and bright lawyers, first generation lawyers, to join the bench, make the monetary sacrifice, but not knowing what will be the fate of their candidature, whether they would
Yeah.
like to be dragged along on this process. And that's my personal experience while asking these younger lawyers that they flag this issue as a particular problem. That's why I have suggested that maybe seeing the working of the post NJAC collegium system, there have been challenges in this period because the political dispensation felt that NJAC was right, the collegium system exists, should not exist. That tussle has produced this some kind of a blockages at time. Therefore, you have today a number of cases still pending of judges' appointment. Numbering number transfers are pending, other things are pending, and the case being taken up on an application filed by one of the parties on the time bound schedule was to push the government to look into the issue and do so. Sometimes we do take up matters to say that it's not like you punish the government or something, but you want to push the movement of what has to be done.
Okay, I have a lot of questions on the Collegium, but since you mentioned the case, the petition that was about the delay in the appointment of judges, now you said something very cryptic in court. This matter was to be brought before you on a particular Tuesday, I think it was, and suddenly it was deleted from the list. Prashant Bhushan was one of the advocates in the case, and he brought to your attention in open court, which is how we all know about it, that this is mysteriously gone. And you said that some things are best left unsaid. Now, I assume that you had to leave them unsaid when you were on the bench. Today, you're a free man. What did you leave unsaid there?
So let's understand the court works on a master of the roster principle. It has worked so far. Ultimately, it's the chief's call what matter should be heard by whom. It was listed before my court because I was party to the original judgment for Justice Bobde and Justice Suryakant. We were three judges. So somebody must have marked the case to me. That is why I took up the case. It's not that I took up the case myself. And the application in this behalf was a contempt petition. We only issued notice, not on a contempt petition, despite a lot of insistence from the petitioners, but to see that the movement was there. And the Attorney General used to regularly appear. And when the matter was taken up, there were movements. There were movements, there were appointments. So I felt the Attorney General was, he said so, and he was doing a task to see that these difficulties are ironed out. I was towards the end of the tenure. Yes, it could have been listed before me for once. Ultimately, it would have gone beyond that tenure to somebody else. I believe somebody else will take it up. Nobody is indispensable in the system, and somebody who would be entitled to hear the case on the basis of the roster and the judgment passed, because there are certain norms, would try to see that the difficulties which have arisen are ironed out. I mean, see, what troubled me was the fact that say 13 cases are pending of judges whose recommendation is first time sent and not gone back with any objection. Reiterated cases which you talked about are pending for them. Transfer 6 cases are pending for transfers, which I think the government has very limited role. Chief Justice's appointment, 3 of them were recommended but are still pending. So I was hoping that by the next date, the attorney would be able to get some movement on it, and more movement would come at a later date. But be that as it may, I'm still hopeful that there would be a movement.
You know, you're still being very I don't know if the word is diplomatic, so let me push you just a little bit further. The roster, who gets what case, is a very fiercely debated thing, not just in legal circles but also in political circles. More recently, for example, you had a lawyer and a congressman like Abhishek Singhvi argue about why a certain case went before a certain judge. I think the judge mentioned was Justice Bela Trivedi. That became a big point. You had Dushyant Dave writing off letters to the bench. This roster, who gets to hear which case, is such a deeply sort of divisive and almost political conversation. What is the appropriate response for the Chief Justice, who's the master of the roster, in such a situation?
So let's look at it. The roster system evolves in the High Court also and Supreme Court also. It's not such a problem in the High Court. The judge assigns the cases and it's done, and the Chief Justice has a role. I mean, I've been almost little less than 4 years as a Chief Justice of two courts. I worked it. There were some problems which would arise, and one would try to work it out in a manner which I believed was the correct way. Similarly, for the Supreme Court. Now, let's say in the Supreme Court, we are not one court as a whole as it is. We come from different courts with different thought processes. It's not a court which sits in sync with all the judges sitting together. There are benches. So there will be different. This being the last court, it becomes a more contentious issue because a particular kind of case, a set of lawyers would not like to or like to have it before a court. But then the Chief Justice is master of the roster, the first amongst the equals. You have to trust somewhere for the matters to be tackled. And that trust has been reposed in the Chief Justice to do a particular job. And I don't believe in disruptions from within a system. I believe that we must work in an institution which is important. And the Chief and myself have had a very good working relationship over a period of time. There will always be some difference of view, but that's not material.
So it's interesting that you say that you don't believe in disruptions from within. I take you back to a few years ago when the roster was similarly debated within, and we had an unprecedented image of a press conference being addressed by judges of the Supreme Court. There are the images. Very different response from the kind you're suggesting today. What did you think of this moment? What did you think of this particular press conference by Supreme Court judges?
Well, they did what they thought was right, but I don't believe it achieved anything very much. There's no change. Some of them there subsequently became Chief Justices. The system has continued. So I believe that if there is a challenge or some difference of perception, it must be sorted out within the system. That's how an institution works. It's true of any institution.
Would you have gone for such a press conference?
Personally, no. I wouldn't do it.
Justice Gogoi, who went on to be the Chief Justice, also went on to become a member of Parliament. What sort of signal do you think that sends? And if someone made a similar offer to you, what would you say?
So that was his call. He believed that this was an honor being conferred, and he took it that way. I as an individual would not take it. That's different, but that's perception which matters. I'm not wanting to take anything. That is my decision. Whether somebody else wants to take something or not, that is his decision.
But aren't there larger issues? Aren't there larger
the difference of perception will always occur on these things.
I agree, and it's very personal, but there are also larger issues, because the moment a judge is offered, and this has happened to other constitutional bodies also. We've had election commissioners, chief election commissioners joining government in other, so it's not about this government or that government. This has happened on all governments. But personally, when you say, personally, I would not become a member of Parliament, there is a message, right? Somebody can look at a judge and say, okay, this judge is now an MP. Maybe he or she was always close to so-and-so government. I mean, what kind of message do you think it sends out?
So when people come through a judicial system and have reached a particular position, you must have some trust in those people to take a call. I think we are becoming, as a society, let's not become doubting on everything. If you start doubting everything, nothing will work. Let's look at the positive side also. It's like news, dog bite man, man bite dog situation. There are many positive news also which arise, which is not. So what the judiciary does positively is often not given enough focus, I think. But it faces criticism, which is fine. As an institution, you are bound to face criticism. I don't think whether a person in his judicial career, what he decides is going to be influenced by the possibility that he may be offered something, he may accept something. Nobody knows at that point of time whether such an offer would come or what would happen. These all occur at a subsequent stage of time. Now, the other is a concept that should one, having occupied that position, at all accept it? is bound to have some individual discretion in this decision. So it's not for just for the sake of it I say this. So
fair enough, but let's come back to the kind of tension, as it were, between governments, and I say governments in plural, and the courts. A certain amount of it is inevitable. But we have seen a kind of public calling out, at least by the former law minister of the Collegium. We have seen, as I mentioned earlier, judges who have been recommended, their files just gathering dust, like Saurabh Kirpal. Uh, we have recently seen the government move a law that basically changes a Supreme Court judgment on how election commissioners, who should be on the panel that chooses election commissioners. The Chief Justice has been removed. Do you believe that there is more tension today between the government and the courts, or is this how it's always been?
no, whenever there have been, let's see, there is a turf, and there's a little bit of turf war will always remain. With coalition governments, the judiciary has been able to push more. With strong governments, it has been less so. They feel they've come with a mandate, and therefore, but then you have to recognize that the court is in an institution under the constitution. It has been given a role. That role is to provide a check and balance. When I said it doesn't provide a role of an opposition, it means that there are certain battles which must be fought in the political domain, and certain matters which have a legal ramification, which the court. So these little bit of tensions always remain. I recollect Justice Sabharwal, whom I knew as the Chief Justice of the country, used to at times say that if there is a mild undercurrent of tension, that's good for the system because each is working in his own. If this things are too hunky dory, then there is a problem. So let's look at it that way.
How would you describe the last few years?
These last few years have been time period when there has been a little up and down, certainly, in the equation. That is arising because after almost many years, such a government with such a large mandate came into being. So their perception will be different from a coalition government, which is dependent on many factors for its survival. So I was anticipating a little push when a majority government came. They have stayed for a long period of time, and they have their own perceptions as to what that mandate envisages. But I envisage the role of the judiciary certainly as a check and balance in anything, not to uphold the government view, not to be an instrument of the opposition, but to make its own call on legal issues, leaving the political debate minus the legal principles to a different forum where it must take place.
You just said we are not an instrument of the opposition, nor are we there to be supplicants to a government view. Fair enough. What then for you is sort of the ideal role of the judiciary to assert this check and balance? And the fact that you said there's been a little bit of up and down because it's been a very powerful government for almost 10 years now. Does that impact how independently judges are able to act and decide? Any powerful government?
Okay. So when I talk about boldness, I believe it is our duty, it's a bounden duty to proceed in accordance with law. Now, what the law should be, will there be different in perspectives, I would say. But if I believe, how I test it is, if I believe what I'm doing is correct, irrespective of whether the opposition supports it or the government opposes it, that's what it should be. I have faced a scenario where so-called, I would say, liberal views would compliment me when I gave a Perumal Murugan or M.F. Hussain. I also faced a scenario where I would deliver another judgment on contractual matters, and I would say, look, my belief throughout in contractual matters is the government must have its play. And if there is a criminality to it, that must be tested in a different forum. So there would be people who would be friends of mine say, how can you do this and that both? So I would say it's how I believe that particular area of law is to operate. It's not necessarily what I believe is the final view, but I have acted to what I believe is the correct way to look at it. I may be right or wrong, is for the future to judge, and laws change, interpretations change, if you see, as process occurs.
You mentioned the Murugan case, and I have to come to two of your judgments. You were at High Court, Delhi and Madras then, that were really, really, especially the young journalists tracking them. I mean, they gave us so much hope. in the Perumal Murugan case, you said the choice to read is always with the reader. If you don't like a book, I'm quoting from memory here, but if you don't like a book, keep the book away, throw the book away. Yeah, there it is. If you don't like a book, throw it away. But the right to write has to be unhindered. That was a really, really important judgment. And another one, even before Murugan, many years before Murugan, a fiercely political verdict was on MF Hussain, eventually pushed out by his own country. And you quashed the obscenity cases against him. You spoke about how art is never chaste. Art, by definition, has to be a little dangerous. Good art has to take chances. Do you think that those judgments are in some ways the one where your passion, your heart really manifested? Would you write those judgments today as a senior at the Supreme Court?
Yes, definitely. I thought it gave me an opportunity to write something which I was close to my heart. On the lighter side, when the MF Hussain judgment came to me as a reference, it had been adjourned more than 15 times, not heard. So I thought it's a good time to begin it and write on it, because
Yeah.
we keep writing normal routine work. Sometimes something challenging comes. That's the judge's mind being challenged, how to write about it. And it's not some kind of a personal notion only. I just say, look around you, look at your history, look at your monuments, look at the art which is prevalent, look at your temples. And am I wrong in saying what I have said? If you look around and see how this country traces its history too, its heritage is that, actually.
Did you face blowback? Did you face pushback?
Pushback in what? Okay. Say after MFS, and my family would say, why are we similarly in Perumal Murugan? The public debate is such today because everything and everybody has an opinion. It will
Yeah.
arise. And that
Yeah.
can be very academic at times because there are people
Yeah.
have different notions. It would happen even if I wrote a Rafale, again, on the reverse side. So
Yeah.
it is a reflection. That's why when I say it's a reflection of sometimes the environment where there is less of debate and more my way. So people have to people want to talk, but people must also learn to listen. I think listening is a very important art, which is dying out at present. We seem to be all interested in saying something or the other about something we know anything about or don't know anything about, but they'll have an opinion. But if you want them to hear, there's a paucity in that aspect.
I completely agree. But we have a few minutes left with you, Justice Kaul. I want to ask you, is there any particular judgment, a decision you've taken that when you look back, you wish you had done it differently?
Uh, Not really, not really. A lot of routine work gets done on the basis of what I had a habit of dictating a lot of orders in court. That was my perception because Justice Kripal, who was like a mentor to me, told me, "ये judgment पालने की आदत मत डालना." Write in court as much as possible. But there are judgments where you have to think. So MFSN, I would write and let it lie for a week. Let it evolve in my mind. The last sentence, which acquired some prominence, was something I thought of on the morning when I had to pronounce the judgment. So these things arise. You want it to be in your conscious and subconscious mind rotate. So I can't pinpoint anything. Yes, I'm proud of MF Hussain. I'm proud of Perumal Murugan. I'm proud of giving women the right of permanent commission in the army.
That's right. I forgot that one. Thank you for reminding me of that. Yes.
So that's something. It's not a great written judgment, I would say, Arthur, but it had a huge impact, and I wanted to do that. And the Supreme
Yeah.
Court took it forward. So these
Yeah.
are impact making. Privacy was another thing which I found. 370 was the last I wrote. Uh, there have been many cases, commercial cases, because I've sat on the commercial side, being in Delhi for a lot of time. So whether it was IPR, I learned subjects on the bench. The subjects I had not practiced as a lawyer, you get an opportunity to write. So I can't pinpoint any one thing where I would say, would I do it differently? No, not really. But yes, it's not that I must have made mistakes. It's natural that I could have made mistakes, and therefore
Yeah.
I'm not touchy when at times people say, "Oh, your judgment may be set aside." I feel it's my opinion. Somebody else may have a different opinion. What difference does it make? If I'm in minority, my opinion tomorrow may become the major opinion. If I'm a major opinion tomorrow, somebody may else think differently. So we should not be touchy about what we write, because writing an evolution of society is a constant process. Society will evolve, and at that point of time, 10 years down the line, some other thought process will emerge. Um, we are not immortals in that sense either, of writing or otherwise.
You said that you don't have any significant or cognizable regret that you can that you can think about right now. But do you wish the courts would maybe function differently? And I come back to how judges are appointed. I take a Saurabh Kirpal, you mentioned his father, a Saurabh Kirpal, who for years, and it seems to be because he's gay, he's not being made a judge. That's the popular perception among people. So there's a Saurabh
Right.
Kirpal on which the Collegium will not assert itself. And then there's a Victoria Gauri, whose appointment sort of goes through and becomes a subject of much controversy. When you look at the juxtaposition of these two cases, what do you see?
So in Gauri's case, the Collegium took a decision on the basis of material there. Some people woke up later, said this is the problem, that is the problem. In the meantime, the judge was appointed. But I don't think there have been any complaints in our working. Similarly, in Saurabh Kirpal's case, yes, it is possibly the perception of the government that this is not the time as yet for such an appointment. The Collegium had taken a conscious decision. Even his name got remained up and down unattended for a long period of time till we came into the Collegium. We addressed the issue and sent it in a particular manner. These pulls and pressures, these difference of perceptions between the government and the court have remained and will remain in that sense. So there is no 100% solution. The only idea is that there should not be, in routine, there should not be too many problems. There may be extreme examples. My concern is that in this battle between NJC or the Collegium system, there should not be such delays in normal appointments, or small things should not count in making appointments. Otherwise, we will lose out on talent. That's my greatest concern, that the young, upwardly mobile, first generation lawyers who have come from national law schools are voicing concerns that why should we put our head on the block? I don't think that's a good idea. We should be able to persuade them to accept responsibility. And one of the methods of doing that and making them, apart from the financial sacrifice they make, is to see that the process is smooth enough so that when they say yes, the names get through.
Your former colleague, Justice Rohinton Nariman, felt very strongly about the new law that basically overturns the Supreme Court judgment on the appointment of election commissioners. What do you feel about that?
So the judgment originally delivered had filled a gap in law. That's
That's
how
right.
the judgment is structured. Now the government makes that law. Now there'll be a debate whether this is the right law to make or not. But that's then testing. There's a difference between what should be the right law, is it an ideal law, or whether it's unconstitutional. Because when Parliament passes a law, unless it is declared unconstitutional, that is a law. So since it was filling a vacuum, the government said, we'll enact the law. And they, in their wisdom, lack of it, decided not to give a role to the Chief Justice. That is what is the ground. This has happened. Just look back in history, it's happened so many times.
And you feel what about it?
So all I say is the Election Commission is a very important post. The trust of the election system is with it. And there should be a confidence that the Election Commission should be a body where everybody has faith.
Okay, I'm going to end with asking you, if there's one thing you could change about India's judiciary, it would be what?
So, well, we have to devise a better management systems to see that cases are decided more promptly, that we develop a much better alternative dispute resolution system. I am a great votary of mediation for a long time. I believe it's a better system to solve the normal problems because people get a solution which is their solution rather than being given a solution by us, which we cannot do. So I would only give an example of this, of what one of my good friends, Justice Nandajok, told me many years back. He was standing in a one of the small khokas outside the Delhi High Court when one of the trust litigants must have come there and asked for a cold coffee or something and was giving instead something else to drink. So he asked him, "What did मैंने क्या मांगा था?" So he realized that fellow had made a mistake and he turns around and said, कि ये पिछले जन्म में जज होगा, मैं मांगता कुछ और हूँ, ये देता कुछ और है. So that's a perception. So mediation, it does not happen. Why it doesn't happen is because he decides the fate of it. And if we have to reduce litigation, if we have to get better solutions, we must encourage mediation. We have an act finally. if you want to shorten the time period of litigation, the more heinous cases aside, the constitutional aside, I think mediation has to play a much larger role if we want to have a quick decision process in place. Because the greatest weakness, I think, of our system, which is played out again and again, is that we take too long to decide, even if the people have faith and come to us.
Thank you, Justice Kaul. I could go on for hours. There's so much to talk about, but we must let you go and enjoy your first few days of, post-judge life. And I'm particularly moved to hear about your trips to Kashmir, and I hope you'll get to spend, you and others of the community will get to spend a lot more time there. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mojo Story has always made a commitment to its viewers to go to where the story is. And as you can see here, we are at the epicenter of the Israel war on Gaza. We are right at the front line, about 1 mile from the Gaza Strip, as the Israeli military gets ready with its tanks and its gunners to begin its final frontal assault that will take troops into Gaza. As we said, we are not like other organizations. We believe in giving you all sides of the story objectively and as much as possible from the ground. And that's exactly what we're doing here, covering the biggest global story today from the epicenter of the war zone. So please, we need your support. Support us, become a Mojo member, subscribe to us, spread the word, and thank you for your support.